Pirate Kings, Pirate Queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea. Welcome back to our countdown of the best decks in OP06 as determined by the data I've compiled as we head toward the set's release on Friday. If you haven't had a chance to see the video on Reiju, our number 7 deck, check that one out. I've got a link to it right in the description. I'll be posting 1 or 2 videos each day leading up to the set release, as well as one big video with all the info put together on release day. So if you want to follow along or get notified when the big analysis comes out, give that subscribe button a click. It will be a huge help in making future content. In case you're a new viewer, here is a quick rundown of my process for these videos. I put every single deck list from One Piece top decks and second storage into a spreadsheet, weighted each entry according to the tournament's level of competition, the list's placement in that tournament, and how far into the format that tournament took place to come up with a point system that let me arrange the decks into tiers, as well as an algorithm to put together a typical winning deck list weighted to the conditions that I just mentioned. You'll also see helpful stats about a deck's cost curve, the amount of 2K counters, non-counters, blockers, events, and other relevant figures, so take a look and enjoy as we get into the next deck in our countdown to OP06. Coming in at number 6, we have a very fun deck from this new set, and probably one of my pet decks for the format, PERONA. It took some time for her to see traction. She didn't really pop up in the format until just before Star Deck 13 came out. Being a black deck and a green deck, she's got some control capabilities, but not full-on control like Sakazuki per se. I like calling her a stun, delay, tempo-ish deck with some stall and starve capabilities as well. PERONA has 2 abilities, and Bandai made the healthy decision to only let a player choose 1 to use each turn. She can either rest up to one opponent's character that costs 4 or less, or give one opponent's character -1 cost for the turn. This is incredibly versatile. The -1 cost is great in the early and mid game to clean up board state, get those tempo plays going, and the rest ability is great at the end to get past blockers or to set up stun plays with Doflamingo. And if you don't need to use the leader's reduction early on, you can just rest whatever your opponent has on the board, be that a small character to attack into, or a blocker like Borsalino. Tsuru is an obligatory inclusion in a black deck. Again, this isn't a full-on control deck, but Tsuru gives us an efficient option to swing certain situations. For example, a 5-cost blocker, or any 5-cost character that you wouldn't be able to rest using the leader ability on its own. We've got 2 different searchers in this deck. Even though PERONA is a Thriller Bark type leader, that's not the predominant character type in this deck. We are running Don Quixote and Navy characters in here. Baby 5 is a Jewelry Bonnie for Don Quixote pirates. You can play her for 1, rest her, and then look at the top 5 to get any Don Quixote pirate card from the top 5 of your deck. So she's going to get some of the big power cards in here, especially our 10-cost Doflamingo, but she's also going to stave off our opponent's early attacks on life, because they're not going to want us to get resources. And this works out really well because in this deck particularly, we're not trying to get too low on life early. We want to maintain a healthy total until we're in the late game. You're going to be seeing a lot of brand new in this video series as well. He fetches our Navy cards. On play, look at the top 3 from your deck, reveal 1 Navy, add it to hand, then discard the other 2. You'll see we have quite a few Navy cards in here, usually from 17 to 20 in the deck. He's great for consistency. You can rest a small character, 1-cost searcher, maybe a chump blocker, and attack into them with brand new instead of your leader, so your leader is then free to swing life. He's also going to fuel the discard for our 8-cost Gecko Moria. We'll get into him soon because, oh boy, that's a card. Some lists were also playing the Inupe from set 6, draw 2, trash 2, on play or KO, specifically if you have Thriller Bark in your leader type, but he wasn't prevalent enough to make it into this 50. Don Quixote Rocinante is a 2-cost, 1,000 power chump blocker, very cheap to play, but he is best used near the end of the game. And that's because he also has the ability to act as a substitute when one of your other rested characters would be KO, whether that's by battle or by effect. And even though he can only block when he's active, this effect can be used whether he is active or rested, which is probably going to happen quite a bit since he can be resurrected by Gecko Moria. As an example, let's say that your opponent wants to clear the Borsalino blocker you have. They can't KO by effects. If they're not running blue, they're not going to be able to tuck it. So the only way that they could get around it is by attacking into it. If you have Rosinante on the field as well, they're going to have to swing into that Borsellino twice if they want to remove it. Rosinante is also seen by both Baby 5 and Brand-New because he is Navy and Don Quixote Pirates, so he's an incredibly consistent card. Tashigi's mainly going to be another couple 2k counters, but she could come in clutch if you're facing up against Reiju, since she lets you get an easier KO on an early 7-cost Ichiji. If you play her down turn 2 going first, and then the Reiju player decides to go for a rush Ichiji play on their second turn, you're going to come back to your turn, you'll have 5 down, and they'll have a rested 7-cost. PERONA brings it down to 6, and then you could potentially play a Suru to bring it down to 4, and then use Ryuma, which we'll talk about in a second, to KO it since it will be at 4 cost. But if you're missing the Suru, or you have DS Drake in hand instead of Ryuma, you can bring it down to 4 with Tashigi, and then you'll have a much easier time KOing it. That's just one example. I can see her being useful against Yellow at times as well. She wasn't really played much in these earlier parts of PERONA's success. These slots used to be the 3rd and 4th copies of Kuzan. Adding a character without any counter can be a little difficult in this deck, but the fact that he replaces himself does help with that, and being able to reduce something's cost by 4 sets up some really, really big plays. This isn't limited to KOing an 8 cost or a 9 cost if it's already rested through your Ryuma or Drake, plus maybe the leader ability, but you can also rest an 8 cost and then either attack into it or lock it with your 10 cost Doflamingo. Japanese players were a bit split on how many counts to play of Kuzan. Like I mentioned before, there was a pretty noticeable shift from 4 as the norm down to 2, but he's really helpful if you play him at the right time, especially off Gecko Moria. 4-cost Borsellino is just the ultimate staple card for a black deck. This dude's been $30 plus since December. Protection against control decks is great in this meta, and taxing a dome for your opponent's attacks is just great across the board in a deck that's trying to stall out like this one is. Now we're going to get into our big tempo cards with the Sword God Ryuma. He was literally made for this deck in particular. He has vanilla stats, and he KOs a rested 4-cost on play or on KO. So you get tempo, you get to start processing your opponent's board, and they are discouraged from returning that, unless they're blue. He's got no counter, but he's our go-to play turn 3 or turn 2 going second. And he's 4-cost, so Moria can revive him and you can do it over and over and over again. The only real downside is that he's not searchable by Brand-New or Baby 5, so just keep that in mind as you draw your opening hand. He's probably going to be one of your main mulligan targets. DS Drake is very similar. He's basically our 5th through 8th copies of backup Ryuma. He's a 5-cost, so you're only going to be able to play him from turn 3 and onward, and he can't be revived by Moria for that reason, but he is searchable by Brand-New, and he's got a 1k counter to make up for that, plus he's going to take a little more effort to remove since he's a 5-cost. Sabo also sees a big uptick in play during set 6. He's going to give us protection to any KO effects, so we can keep the tempo that we start to establish, and the cycling is going to get us closer to the cards that we need, and especially the ones that we can't search, like Ryuma, and especially Gecko Moria. Virgo's just going to be a 2k. He's not something you're really looking to play onto the board, but the perk is that he is a dual searchable target, just like Rosinante, Navy, and Doflamingo Pirates in one card. From here we get into our top end, starting with the new best card in black. In my opinion, the best card in set 6, Gecko Moria. He's an 8-cost 9k, and he has the overpowered ability to, on play, resurrect a 4-cost and a 2-cost from your trash, 1 rested and 1 active. That's 14 Dawn of Bodies for 8. Insane. And there are so many directions you can take the choices you make with him. If you want to establish defense, you get Borsellino and Rosinante. If you want to get a KO effect off, you go Suru and Ryuma. If you need hand advantage, you get Kuzan and Brand-New, and then you can also set up for a big Dofi play on your next turn. And 9k body is no slouch. I love getting 3 cards out of my opponent's hand when I attack their leader. This card's overtuned. I don't know what they were thinking. And our big boss is the 10-cost Don Quixote Doflamingo from set 4. In the early and mid game, you're going to be focusing on tempo, getting rid of your opponent's bodies, making sure that they can't throw a bunch of offense your way. But at a certain point, you stop focusing on that, and you start shifting to stunning the bodies that your opponent has, so they have no chance of lethaling you, and then overwhelming them with the pressure that you just keep on building turn after turn. He is our ideal search target off of Baby 5. You're always going to want to see multiple Doflamingos over the course of a game. The winner, oh my god, they made this card seem so long. Whoever wins this war becomes justice. is a zero-cost event that lets us discard a card from our hand and give someone an extra 3k power. Basically, it's a 2k counter, and you are turning one of your cards into a 1k. This will really come in handy to make sure we don't get clogged up with all of these non-counter cards we're running, but the trigger to rest an opponent's character with a cost of 4 or less also sets up our Ryuma, our DS Drake, and our Doflamingo plays as the game goes on. Here are the inclusion and card count stats for the cards in the algorithm list. You'll see that a lot of these were played in every single deck, and most of the other ones were played in at least 70%. Tashigi is really the only straggler, and that's just because she was a later inclusion in the list. And even though the shell was pretty much set in stone once PERONA started taking tops, there was some innovation there. Baby 5 could be another searchable 2k counter if you feel like you don't have enough of those. Inupe, I briefly mentioned him. On play or on KO, you can draw 2, trash 2. Great for cycling. Brook is a 6-cost 6k. He's a nice tech if you really don't want to deal with sticky bodies, if you don't want to deal with your opponent saboing their own board against black. On play, you can either put one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 into the trash. You're not KOing it, so immunity doesn't work. You can get rid of a Borsalino like this. Or you can make your opponent put 3 cards from their trash to the bottom of their deck in any order. Useful against something like Moria if they're running low on discard resources and you don't want them to Absalom or Lucci you into oblivion. Ice Age is the most efficient cost reduction that black has. 1 Doan for -5 is incredibly powerful. If you're not feeling Kuzan, maybe you want to try this, but the deck has enough, and at a certain point, you're not really worried about KOing, you're just trying to keep the tempo up. Ironically, the PERONA character from set 6 barely saw any play. On play, you can rip a card from your opponent's hand, or reduce the cost of a character by 3 if your opponent has 5 cards in hand. She's a 2k. She's also not searchable though, so she's not great for the consistency here. And then everything else I think was just played in a singular list. The 2-cost Rocinante Chump Blocker, searchable. Sugar can automatically get a rest if you're trying to go for the Dofi play. Killer's pretty cool actually. On play, KO arrest a character with 3 or less. I'm not sure how relevant that number is here, but I like the idea. Viola is another searchable 2k. DS Drake can buff up your Navy characters if you find yourself attacking with them a lot. Arlong can stop an opponent's leader from attacking. Someone decided to try playing 2 copies of the 8-cost kit here. I think that's a viable option, but I don't think that's the best place for him in this format. We'll get into that over the course of the week. And then Great Eruption. Someone played 1 copy for an extra -2. I'm still not even sure you need it. There is so much consistency in this deck. There's so much advantage in this deck, and again, you have ways to reduce cost. Maybe one of. Feel free to try it out. The general curve of this deck isn't anything too complicated. Early game, you're going to play your Searchers, your Baby 5s, and your Brand News. Maybe Tashigi if you think you might need the extra reduction on board. Mid game, you're going to be KOing things with Drake or Ryuma. Maybe setting up a Sabo to give your board some security. And then you just spam Moria and Doflamingo until you have ground your opponent out of resources, then go in for lethal. This might just be me, but PERONA's a pretty fun deck. And I did not expect I'd be saying that. I did not think I'd enjoy it nearly as much as I do. It's a good resource grind / go tall deck, and the concept as a whole is pretty linear. Again, the curve isn't that difficult to follow, but there are some pretty central pivot points that do reward good forethought, and I suggest everyone try this out. If you have a decent collection of cards from sets 1 through 5, then the only real inclusions you're going to need here are the Ryuma and the Moria. Depends what your budget is. For Moria, I think that card's just going to be very important to have, especially since Japan didn't ban him. We'll see if things change in the West. At some point, getting a playset's probably good if you're going to be competitive, meaning that this deck could be a good option for you. Hope you've enjoyed the profile. This was number 6 in our countdown to OP06. If you have your own thoughts, or if you've tried PERONA for yourself, feel free to leave a comment below. If you enjoyed the video, please give a like, and if you want to be notified as soon as I post the next in the series and that big video on release day, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you so much. This is Sakura Kingdom. I suddenly have the urge to hit up a hot topic, and I'll see you soon.